All right. I think we will get started because we have a lot to get through today. So welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for taking time of your busy day to join us for this webinar. I'm Maya Persson. I'm Senior Advisor, Knowledge Management and Communications, supporting the REAL Award. And before we start, I just wanted to take some time for important tech instructions. This webinar is done in both English and French, so we offer French interpretation. Whether you prefer to listen in French or English, it's important that you choose your channel. So at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is a menu, and you will see a little button that looks like a globe that's called interpretation. So click on that and then choose English or French. If you don't see that button, you may need to click on another button that's called More with 3 dots in it. If you click More and then Interpretation and then choose English or French. I also wanted to say that there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And that's where we would love for you to put any questions that pop up as we go through the webinar. And we're hoping to make space to address those questions. So rather than using the chat, please use the Q&A box. That should also be in that Zoom menu along the bottom of your screen. So use the Q&A box and feel free to just enter questions as we move forward. So a couple of words about the REAL Award. The REAL Award is funded by the USAID Center for Resilience, which is hosted under the Bureau for Resilience, Environment, and Food Security, and was established to respond to the demand among USAID missions, host governments, implementers, and other key stakeholders for rigorous yet practical monitoring, evaluation, strategic analysis, and capacity building support related to resilience. REAL consists of a consortium of Save the Children, Mercy Corps, and Tango International. You can learn more about REAL on our webpage, and you can also check out all our resources, including an interactive dashboard and other cool products if you follow the link that's just pasted in the chat to check out and learn more about REAL. All right, so it is now my great pleasure to introduce John Meyer for some opening remarks. John is Senior Strategy and Impact Advisor at the USAID Center for Resilience, and he's also the AOR, meaning that he's the one managing the REAL Award. So over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Maya, and good day to everyone. You've introduced me, and there's my picture and title, so I don't need to do that. We're very, very grateful to REAL for putting on this webinar for us, but also all the background work that was done on the toolkit and the decision tree and other juicy items you're going to be exposed to today. But why? Why do we care about this stuff? So in the Center for Resilience, we obviously have an interest and need for good data and evidence regarding resilience. And I'm personally kind of front and center in that effort over here. But I have a previous life as well as Chief of Party of USAID-funded resilience activities in the highlands of Ethiopia. And, dating back to those years, a great hunger for kind of more and better evidence that might show whether what we're doing matters, makes people more resilient, helps them get through hard times. If you have a history in this sort of thing, you know that resilience is very, very difficult to measure. And it's a intangible quality or set of intangibles that in normal times isn't observable, isn't measurable, and some would say. And when it is measured, we see some powerful indices, but ones that don't necessarily tell a compelling story, take a long time to generate, and may not be available for adaptive management or that timely decision making, et cetera. So the RMS is very intriguing. We for sure know that a person or a group or a system is resilient if during a crisis it sustains, perhaps even thrives. So the idea of a very time-sensitive way to kind of get into the weeds and collect that data and have it available, just really appealing. That is my opinion, and that is why I'm interested in RMSs. But I think one other thing we're going to hear during the course of the hour and a half is there's a whole range of options here, and these different options would be of interest depending on your objectives and your budget and your context, et cetera. And so, I'm interested from my perspective to see what Jill and the team have to offer, and hope you all will be hearing some things that are important to you. So thanks, and I'm going to pass it back to Maya.
Great. Thank you so much, John. And now we're going to move over to Jill. But before, I just want to do one more reminder about interpretation. So I know quite a few people have joined since we started. Please do choose the language of your choice. Just go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, find that button that's called interpretation. You may need to click more and then interpretation, and then choose English or French, whatever you prefer. So now over to Jill, my real colleague, who is the author behind this toolkit that we're going to talk about today. Jill is Senior Resilience Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning Advisor for Mercy Corps. Yeah, she will lead us through today's webinar. So over to you, Jill.
Okay. Thank you so much, John and Maya, for the introduction. Thanks everyone for joining this webinar. Like Maya said, I'm Jill Scantlin, and I work with Mercy Corps, and I'll be leading us through the webinar today. I also wanted to apologize if I sound a little bit sick, because I am. I have a cold, so hopefully I won't be sneezing throughout the webinar, but apologies if that's what happens. All right, so before we dig into the RMS toolkit, I wanted to give you all just some background on how the RMS toolkit came together, because a lot of things, a lot of people, and a lot of other guidance through REAL have sort of led us to the development of this toolkit. So just a bit of background. In 2019, REAL published a guidance note on RMS, the Recurrent Monitoring System. But really since then, the number of RMSs has increased substantially. And so given this increase, the REAL Consortium launched a project around RMS and calling it the RMS Technical Consultation Project. And really this was to understand what are the collective challenges and solutions that RMS designers and users face when designing and implementing an RMS. And so we started off this project with a landscape review, which we reviewed all known RMSs that were published and available from different organizations across a 10-year span, so from 2010 to 2019. roughly. And we summarize some of the common methodological, logistical, the practical challenges that RMS designers and users have experienced when implementing and using RMS. These challenges were then further explored through meetings with a small group of RMS designers and users from different research organizations, implementing partners, and USAID missions in the summer of 2023. And then from these consultations and these deep dive group meetings, and really from what we learned from the landscape review, and also just the collective experience from myself kind of implementing and designing RMSs over the past 8 or so years, and other colleagues on Real that have been working in this space, we determined that it would be very helpful for to develop a toolkit, a kind of practitioner or implementer facing toolkit that helps to guide people through those critical decisions that you need to make when designing an RMS. So yes, that is sort of the history behind the toolkit. It's not just me developing it. It's kind of the collective experience and history of a bunch of people, some of which are on the call today, bringing their collective experience together to put it into hopefully one-stop shop, or a toolkit that can help you design an RMS. So that leads us to the webinar today. And so we're just going to really briefly go through what are we going to talk about today. So this webinar will focus on actually walking you through the main features of the RMS Design Toolkit. So we'll have a link that we could even put the link in now, so you can get a head start and open it up if you haven't already. And so we'll walk through some of those main features, main sections. We'll then quickly go into a section where we'll be going through some RMS design scenarios where we'll present some kind of design challenge. And then we'll ask you in the audience to look through the toolkit to try to find where the solution is, or where you can find some answers in the toolkit itself. So you can get some time to kind of click through it yourself. And then we'll hear from some colleagues who have the real life examples of those challenges and how they navigated those challenges, what sort of solutions they applied. And then we'll have some additional resources that we'll share, and a webinar evaluation. Okay, so now we're going to actually get into the toolkit, and we're going to click through it and see what are the features. And so just for you, again, if you are interested in going through this while I'm talking, you can, I think probably in the chat by now, the link has been given. And so you'll see this page in the FSN network. And this page, it has all of the resources, so that the design toolkit here is at top, and the page I'm looking at is in English, but if you are a French speaker, we have the French available here. On the left-hand side, you'll see available in languages, French. And so on this page, you'll have access to the landscape review, which unfortunately is only in English at this time. And then we have the downloadable versions of the RMS Practical Guidance Note 6 as well on this page. But really for today, you'll want to download that RMS Design Toolkit. And so, yeah, we're going to spend the next maybe 15 minutes, hopefully not too much longer than that, going through the main features of the toolkit. And so the way we designed this was to be interactive, so that you have a guidance or a PDF that is interactive. It allows you to, it's not a dry guidance. We wanted to provide something that was a little more interesting. And so I will try to click through all the features that make it interactive today. And so this is the sort of the first page of the toolkit. You'll see a start here, kind of an arrow, and these dots at the bottom. And these dots will kind of lead you through the introduction, or the opening pages of the toolkit, where you'll see a welcome message that tells you, why is it important, what makes why the RMS, similar to some of the things John mentioned. It also has a definition of an RMS, because I think a lot of people will ask you, or you might ask yourself, like, why is a recurrent monitoring system different than other monitoring activities? What makes it different? What are some of the features? And one of the things I wanted to emphasize and with this toolkit is that, it really is recognizing that an RMS is not, there's no one size fits all design or solution. However, there are some common characteristics of RMSs that really distinguish it from other monitoring and evaluation activities. And so one of them, so these 3 bullet points sort of summarize that. The first is that there's a panel design, or you're following the same people over time. That's quite different from other monitoring activities where you might look at different people at different points in the project life cycle. But an RMS really focuses on a group of the population or participants that you're following over time. Another distinguishing factor, something that makes it an RMS, is you're measuring kind of the 3 main elements of resilience. So that is the resilience capacities, exposure to shocks and stresses, and well-being outcomes. So those are things that you're measuring in your survey or your measurement activity. And then finally, the last point around you're collecting data on populations benefiting from humanitarian development or peace-building interventions. So this point is really just to emphasize that an RMS is not, it's not really a research or just an academic exercise. It is something that you're doing in a humanitarian or development or peace-building program to understand the resilience of that population. It's very implementer focused and very kind of implementation oriented. It's not as some kind of academic exercise. So that really distinguishes it from other types of panel surveys that might exist in the academic world. So this next page of the introduction of the guide, it's sort of a how to use the guide, and it introduces you to the 6 RMS design decisions. And so we will be going through those one by one today, but this is where you can see sort of the continuum of your decision-making process, and where you sort of start around data use and where it sort of ends around the identifying your primary population. Although you'll find this when you're looking through the guidance and using it yourself, is that you might, want to start with decision 1, but you might hop to decision 4 and hop back to decision 2. It's sort of an iterative design process, and the guidance, you'll see some features that allow you to kind of click back and forth quite easily. And another thing I wanted to point out is this checklist, the RMS Design Tool checklist. So if you click on that, it'll bring you to the checklist, and it has an overview of all of the primary considerations or choices or decisions you'll need to make when designing an RMS. And you can even, click and tick off things as you go through them. So as you're designing your RMS, this is a nice tool, a nice kind of at a glance, what do you need to do in order to really design an RMS? And it has an interactive feature of the checkboxes. One other key point is if you get lost in the guidance, you're on some random page, you're not really sure where you are, there is a home button here at the bottom left on most pages. It's that little home icon, and that brings you right back to this table of contents page, which is sort of a landing page. It's a place where you can always go back to if you're not sure where you are in the toolkit, or you want to kind of start over at any point. Okay, I think I've gone through the main parts of that introduction. And so if you have any questions as I'm talking about any of the features or any kind of burning questions that come up, please feel free to put those in the Q&A. And then you will either get to them during the webinar if we have time, or we'll address them after. All right, so let's dig in and go through each of these decisions briefly, just so you can get an idea of what they are, what's in the toolkit. So the first design decision here at the top left, decision 1, really focuses on identifying how you want your audiences or the main stakeholders that you're trying to engage and affect with the RMS. How do you want them to actually use the RMS data? So sure, it's no surprise to you all here on the call, but thinking about the audiences first and thinking about how you want them to use the information is really important to do as a first step, because it really informs all the other decisions that you're going to make. And so this decision kind of gives an overview of the why and how, why focus on RMS data use. You hit the continue button, and it brings you to these other kind of decisions, the main sort of things to consider when thinking about RMS data use. So really it's about who is your primary audience and identifying that and identifying those audiences. And then the next decision is, how do you want to influence each audience with the RMS results? And so the first tool in the toolkit that will help you do that is the RMS tool 1 around audience profiles. And so you can find that either on this page, it says RMS tool 1, but also at the bottom at any time, you can click through any of the tools here. The toolbar at the bottom, RMS tool 1 is the first one. So these audience profiles is a tool that you might have seen before in different kind of communication tools. But it essentially, it walks you through a series of steps for how to identify your audience, how you describe that audience. If you have a lot of different audiences and you're having a hard time prioritizing, it has this matrix here where you can map them, where you're trying to really hone in on the audience that has a high amount of influence and high interest in the RMS. And so that'll be your primary audiences. So you can do that in the beginning when you're trying to really figure out who are you trying to target with your RMS. The other steps are focused on really identifying how you want to influence them and identifying some key enablers or barriers that could promote or prevent that audience from using the RMS. It gives some practical examples here. And then finally, it shows you how you develop this audience profile narrative, and it gives an example here from the Nawiri activity in Kenya. So you develop a profile for that audience, and it really helps to have that in the beginning. You can go back to it continuously throughout the RMS design process as you're trying to figure out who are you targeting with the information. So that's the first design decision, just really briefly. The next decision that you will go through in the toolkit is choosing the primary objective. And so this section outlines the 3 main objectives. When we were doing the RMS landscape review, we pretty much found that most RMSs have one of 3 objectives. And so it describes those objectives around, using the information for actionable data that can be used to inform adaptive management on an ongoing and frequent basis. Your RMS could focus on understanding resilience dynamics by testing relationships in your theory of change. And then there's a lot of RMSs that also focus on wanting to evaluate the contribution of interventions. So having some kind of impact evaluation objective. And so these are the 3 primary objectives. Are not the only objectives, but it walks you through those. And then it asks you another series of questions or considerations when selecting the primary objective. So do all RMS stakeholders agree on that objective? And then the final decision or consideration is specifically for if you want to have an impact evaluation design, there's some other things you'll need to think about. And it links to a technical note on impact evaluations that USA has published. And so that is a really great resource for helping you to think through, is a impact evaluation right for you in the RMS? But what I want to focus on today in this demonstration is going through this tool, the RMS tool 2, which is related to this decision around, do all stakeholders agree on the primary objective? So this tool provides an agenda for a co-creation workshop. So you're having a hard time getting your stakeholders to agree on what you want your RMS to focus on, or you know that you have many different opinions in the room, this is a good tool to use to bring people together to have consensus and try to reach some kind of common ground. And so it has an example agenda that you might want to use when conducting one of these co-creation workshops. All right, I'm going to keep us going and moving through the decisions. We're now on decision 3, which is about choosing the primary RMS learning question. And so one of the main issues that I've found, and also others when we were consulting with RMS designers and during this project, was that usually there's too many learning questions that you're trying to navigate through. And so you might already have learning questions identified in your program and through your learning agenda, or you might bring your team together to say, what do you want to learn through the RMS? And people, because oftentimes the programs that want to do RMSs are these multi-sectoral programs that are working in many different areas, you end up with many questions. And so this decision is really about trying to help you to prioritize those questions and really hone in what you want the RMS to be able to answer. And so the main decision point or consideration and for this section is trying to align those questions with your primary objective. And so that's one way of helping you to navigate that challenge of having too many questions. And so it helps, the toolkit walks you through some examples of different types of questions as they relate to the different RMS objectives, depending on what those are. We also have a tool here at the bottom, the RMS tool 3, prioritizing learning questions. So it provides some additional resources just around developing learning questions. But then it also gives you some more information about, what are the different common types of learning questions that are related to RMS objectives. So the kind of the learning questions that are related to different types of RMS data collection, wanting to understand trends, relationships, explanatory questions. So it gives you kind of an overview there. But I think really the thing that's I found most helpful is this criteria to prioritize RMS learning questions. So if you're faced with a laundry list of questions, you can use this criteria to help you narrow down what you would like to focus on in the RMS. So the next section of the toolkit is focused on decision 4 around determining the analysis method. And so trying to think about the analysis method this early in the design process, I found it's been really helpful. And it's really helpful for the RMS design because the analysis and the approach you want to take to the analysis informs your survey tool design, your sample size calculation, and really also whether you need to hire an external firm or consultant to help you conduct the analysis. So thinking about the analysis this early in the process has been very helpful for many RMS designers. Real and other USA Learning Awards have put out lots of different guidance on conducting analysis. And so this section of the toolkit really just sort of links you to different resources. So there's the Practical Guidance Note 4, the Reals Practical Guidance Note 4, which focuses on resilience analysis, mostly quantitative. Ideal has also published a qualitative design toolkit that has many great options for RMS for conducting qualitative analysis. The RMS tool 4 here also just gives a more in-depth description of the different types of analysis that are common with RMS. So, and what you can expect from that and what it kind of looks like. And it shows, descriptive, correlational analysis, regression analysis, some descriptions of that, and then also the main qualitative approaches used within RMS. And so again, it links you to other resources. Moving along, sorry if I'm talking too quickly, I'll try to slow down for the interpreter. We have our fifth decision, which is focused on data collection strategy. And so when I say data collection strategy, really this is considerations for when and how often you should collect the RMS data. And so this decision, or the considerations for RMS data collection, focuses on, when should you initiate the data collection? So is it seasonal? Do you want to collect data around seasons? Do you want to collect data at just regular intervals, so quarterly or monthly? Or maybe you want to collect data immediately following a major shock or stress event. And so there's things you need to consider for when you should collect data, but then also the frequency. How often? Is it annually, quarterly, biannual? And so the tool that's associated with this decision is RMS Tool 5, and it is a CLA system map. And I'll explain kind of what that is in a minute. But essentially, when your RMS needs to be integrated with the rest of your M&E system. It also needs to be linked up to other processes, like other, pause and reflect meetings that you might have, or other work planning meetings. And so in order to see how it fits kind of within that CLA system of M&E, reflection learning, and design, planning, implementation, there is an example of a CLA system map that we put here that you can create for your program, where you essentially put the timeline on the top, and then you have different M&E activities, reflection activities, and design, planning, implementation activities that you map across any, the fiscal year. And then you can see sort of where your RMS could fit. And so this is an example, again, from the Nyeri activity in Kenya, where they wanted to have a quarterly RMS, and they wanted it to be to kind of synchronized with these the kind of biannual pause and reflect meetings, and also their annual planning process that happens in spring, and then the beginning of the annual planning process sort of begins in spring, and then you have the work plan submitted at the end of October. And so they wanted to have their RMS aligned with those key kind of reflection and decision gate moments in the program. And so this CLA system map allowed them to do that, to see kind of where it fit in. Okay, this is the final decision around defining the RMS sampling strategy. And so this is arguably maybe the hardest decision. So we saved the hardest for last. But it really starts with the question of to whom do you want to generalize your RMS results to? And so, and it walks you through a kind of a more complicated series of decisions that help you to identify your sampling frame. So whether you want it to be population-based, so you can generalize to the wider population in the implementation area, or maybe you want it to be participant-based. And so maybe just speaking to those specific participants that your program is working with. And so it walks through a series of questions that help sort of lead you into a particular direction, or what's the best fit for your specific scenario. It also has some questions around subgroup analysis and how this will really affect your sampling, your sample size, and those sorts of things. And these are kind of the most common questions and considerations that come up when designing an RMS. I wanted to also point out that we have a tool, and so this is kind of moving outside of the sampling strategy tool. Or sorry, I wanted to point out a couple resources with sampling, because, it's quite difficult to do that. And oftentimes you need to hire someone to help you, but we also have some sample size calculator tools that have been put together. And so these are actually very helpful if you want to do it yourself. So Save the Children has a sample size calculator decision tool. So they've linked in this tool to several different sample size calculators that you can use. Also, if your RMS objective is focused on doing an impact evaluation, the humanitarian assistance evidence cycle, which is a learning activity focused on how you can increase impact evaluations in humanitarian programs. They have a power calculation that they've done and shared, and it's already in Stata, which is a statistical software program. So if you have someone who's savvy and understands statistics on your program and you want to do this yourself, here are some resources that you might choose to use. Okay, I'm probably over time. So I am going to try to keep us moving. The final tool I wanted to talk to you all about is this sense-making tool. And so this is something that you would use after you collect your data. And so it's not necessarily involved with the design of an RMS, but I wanted to put it in the toolkit because many teams have found this very, very helpful for achieving their primary objectives around the data use and how they want to influence their audiences. And so this tool goes over sort of the sense-making methodology. What is it? It's a pause and reflect methodology that helps teams make sense of that complex RMS data that usually you're faced with after you collect several rounds. It's not telling a clear and concise story typically, and you have to kind of figure out, what does it mean? So what? You're finding results. What does it mean for the program? And so this methodology helps you to do that and to do it in a way that's participatory with your RMS stakeholders. And so it goes through some of the steps for conducting a sense-making workshop, and it also has an example agenda in case you'd like to conduct one. So we're at the end of the toolkit. There's some annexes that I wanted to point you to. There's some considerations, some other operational considerations you'll want to think about when conducting the RMS. They're sort of practical. Do you have the budget? Do you have the capacity to do this? We've already gone to this page, but there's some additional resources. The RMS, there's a decision tree. John Mayer was talking about this in the beginning. You can kind of think through all of these decisions in more of a decision tree format. It's a visual representation of the 6 design decisions. We have the practical guidance note linked here. And I believe, yeah, and then the toolbar at the bottom, and then some acknowledgements at the end. If you want to cite the toolkit, here's a suggested citation. All right, so I believe that we are going to now move to our scenarios and talking through some design scenarios. And so if you have, yes, please.
Before we
interrupt
jump
me.
into the
Yes.
first scenario, before we jump in, we just have one question
Sure,
from
thank
one of
you.
us. Does the RMS toolkit only guide resilience monitoring or also other aspects of monitoring?
That's a great question. I'm going to go back to, let's see, this toolkit. So I think the short answer is that it doesn't have to be resilience focused. I think a lot of the decisions are good practice with any data collection activity. So it's not specific to resilience per se. And so you could, if you had, let's say you had a program that just had nothing to do, I would argue and say everything has to do with resilience, but maybe it's not your primary focus. I think you could still use this as a good practice or a guide to help you set up any data collection activity. But what the toolkit does do is it helps you think about those special considerations that are important when you're trying to measure resilience. So for example, determining your data collection strategy, what makes an RMS unique is that it does consider shocks and stresses in the timing of the data collection, which might be different than other monitoring activities. So that might not be relevant for you if you are just using this for a regular monitoring activity. So yeah, I would say it is relevant for all data collection activities, but in particular for resilience ones, it will show you those special considerations for measuring resilience as well. So thanks for that question. All right, are we ready to move to the scenarios?
Yes.
And then sorry to do this, but how are we doing on time? I wasn't timing myself. Are we on time or behind?
We're a little bit over.
Okay.
Yes, we're a little bit over. So we'll see if we get through 2 or 3 scenarios. We can take them one by one and kind of see.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Okay. So yes, if you haven't already, please open up the design toolkit. And I'm sure the link is already in the chat, but because you will be using this during this next section. So now I am going to walk us through the first scenario. And so what we'll do is I'll read the scenario, and then we'll ask you to then go through the toolkit to try to find some solutions, or what section of the toolkit would you go to if you were trying to solve some issues around to give your opinion on which parts of the toolkit have been most helpful for this scenario. So this first scenario is around the RMS objective not being clear. And so the USAID mission in country A would like to implement an RMS to measure resilience within a specific implementation area. And so there are many different stakeholders that are interested in this RMS. After 2 rounds of data collection, you share the results at a sense-making workshop with your stakeholders. But during that workshop, you realize there are many different expectations for the RMS and a lack of consensus on what the RMS data should be used for. And so this mismatch between those expectations and what the RMS was actually designed to do and what it was designed to collect leads to a lot of frustration within your stakeholder group and disengagement with the RMS results. So now we're going to give you a couple minutes to just look through the toolkit, click through those decisions, and we'll put the poll up in a second, and where you can vote on which design decision do you think is most relevant for this scenario. I think there's a possibility for more than one. Okay, I see some results coming in. Interesting. It looks like the majority of you all clicking through the toolkit, you found some answers or some solutions, probably not surprisingly, in decision 2, which is focused on selecting the primary objective. I'm also happy to see that some other people also selected decision 1 around kind of data use and identifying your stakeholders and how you want to influence them with the RMS results. And I think those 2 decisions are probably the primary place where you'll find some solutions. I'm going to end the poll now, so thanks everyone for participating in that. And then I will move to the real life scenario here, and how this played out in real life with Tim Frankenberger, who he's had a lot of experience with RMS, and this is a scenario I think that he's experienced quite a bit while working with Tango International. And so Tim is the president of Tango International, which is a research organization that specializes in providing technical assistance in assessment, strategy, and policy development, program design, monitoring and evaluation, specifically focusing on development in humanitarian programs. So Tim, can you tell us a little bit more about some of the specific challenges that you have faced related to what happens when not everyone agrees on an RMS objective?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that in many countries, USAID is implementing multiple projects in the same area, and they are particularly interested in the synergy between these projects in terms about how it actually brings about improvements in well-being and in replace stocks. And so these portfolio assessments are extremely important because they're very interested in how they link or sequence or integrate their projects in a way that brings about a bigger impact. And so when you do a portfolio objective with regards to what is the overall impact of all of these projects, sometimes you can't be specific enough for individual projects to give them enough information for adaptive management. And so that's why I think it's very important to be clear from the very beginning that what is the objective of the RMS? Is it for the mission to determine what the overall impact of its program is, or is it for specific projects that are going to be trying to determine what's going on in that particular project?
Great, thanks, Tim. And then is there a particular example that you're thinking about recently that you've encountered this sort of RMS objective not being clear with all the stakeholders?
Right. So we have been doing another RMS in West Africa, in Burkina Faso and Niger. And what we realized was to overcome this problem of having different expectations, we brought all of the stakeholders together into a workshop to basically have them identify key themes that they wanted the RMS to kind of highlight or to focus on. And we ended up with 4 major themes in which everybody was in agreement on that if we can have more insights on these 4 major themes, then we're more likely to be able to use this information for our programming. And so it was a way to kind of solve two objectives at the same time. We were able to provide the regional office with what the overall impact of its program is, but at the same time, give the stakeholders that are actually implementing the projects information that they found to be extremely useful for their own programming.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, so some of the solutions that Tim, that you're talking about, I think if we're thinking about to the toolkit, what you're describing is sort of that co-creation workshop and having that, in the sort of the beginning and reaching consensus sort of and trying to work through people's different expectations for RMS. Because I think you probably can relate to this, but I know when I've designed RMSs, a lot of times people put everything in it. They want it to do everything. And so and that's not always helpful, I think, to have a scope that's that broad, because of course we don't have endless budgets, we don't have endless time. And also it's just not for the data use, for being, really clear and precise around how you want people to use information and data. It should be pretty focused and targeted. And so what the guidance note really does is tries to emphasize that it's helpful to have a primary objective for your RMS and have your learning questions very much aligned to that, so that the story that you're trying to tell with your RMS is clear, and there's a through line, and there's some kind of value add to the RMS within the entire, within your entire ecosystem of your data collection. It's serving a purpose, a specific purpose. And so what you've described, Tim, and is really challenging, having, stakeholders from across, the mission, from implementing partners to maybe even the community stakeholders coming together and trying to define what those themes are that they really want to learn about. And so I think that co-creation workshop tool is helpful, and something that if you're designing an RMS, anyone here on the call or others listening to the recording, that tool is very useful. And also mapping out your audiences and those audience profiles, which is the first RMS tool. So thanks, Tim, for bringing life to a real life example for this design scenario. Appreciate your insights. Thanks so much. I also, sorry, one more question for you, Tim. Do you any resources that you want to talk about that we can share with the audience?
Yeah, we're creating a couple of products, one in Ethiopia that we'll be able to share fairly quickly in the next month or so, and then the RMS report coming out of West Africa as well. We'll be able to share that.
Perfect. So I think what we'll do is, if for the audience, if you have not already subscribed to the FSN newsletter, I would do that, because that's where new reports that are published and on FSN that's where you'll find out about them. And so it's sort of a watch this space. You can see the next couple months those should be available. All right, so I think we're probably only going to go through 2 scenarios today. And so I think we have a bit of time for a couple questions, if there are any in the Q&A. So I don't know if Emily or Maya, if you could.
Yeah, there are a few questions, and Tim, feel free to stay on as well, in case there are some that you want to jump in on as well. So one question is around the data collection. Should RMS be based on panel data collection, or would a cross-sectional survey serve the overall purpose? Typically, longitudinal panel data collection is resource intensive.
Yeah, I think, Tim, I'll bring in my perspective, and then you can bring in your perspective. So, of course, you should do whatever works for you. I think, though, when we were trying to figure out what really distinguishes, what makes resilience measurement different, why isn't just regular monitoring already measuring resilience? And that was sort of the question we asked ourselves in the beginning of thinking about RMS and conducting these and trying to define what is it. From my perspective, it's so much more power, the story that you can tell about how you're building resilience. So really how people that you're supporting through your programming, how they're accessing and using those resilience capacities to address shocks and stresses, and how that's affecting their well-being over time. That story is told more powerfully if you're able to follow the same people over time. So if you think about your regular monitoring, so maybe your annual participant surveys, if you conduct those, you have a different group of people that you're collecting data on, and it's just giving you snapshots in time. So maybe at the baseline, you understand where people are at in their resilience, and there's a snapshot. And then the next year you have a different snapshot. It's just a different group of people. So you're not able to really see that trajectory over time. So it's possible that those people in the beginning, they're at a different point, and you're not able to show that kind of change over time. And so really what distinguishes and what makes RMS a powerful tool, and maybe this is for you if you're deciding we can't do panel data collection, maybe you're just going to collect some indicators around resilience capacities, well-being outcomes through your regular monitoring. And that's fine, and that's great, and that's okay. But I think if you really want to do an RMS, and really what other organizations that do this have found is that that panel, like following people over time, is really what helps you tell that powerful story of resilience. It is more resource intensive. So that is something to consider, whether it's right for you or not. But that's sort of, I think, my take on it. Tim, maybe you have some other thoughts about that.
No, I think that's exactly right. When we originally came up with doing RMSs a long time ago, one of the things that really drove our decision to use panel was resilience is a dynamic concept, and you want to be able to capture that dynamism over time. And, because people are constantly adapting, managing these risks that they're exposed to. And you want to really understand, okay, we think we've built their resilience this year, but maybe this next shock that hits them is not really, they're not going to be able to manage that one. So, so we want to make sure that we're tracking this over time so that we can really see whether people are resilient. And I think that's the whole purpose of why we do it during different seasons and over years, to just actually track these people and how they change.
Great.
That's great. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. Another question around representativeness. So can RMS take into consideration sample representativeness, especially in locations where there is high population mobility? So yeah, over.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think I might kick that to Tim because I know, Tim, you've had some experience in Somalia with this particular issue of the population being mobile, and sort of representativeness and how you deal with that. Is that something
Right.
you can speak to?
So what we did we were doing an RMS in Somalia, and these populations that we were tracking were very mobile. And one of the things that we relied on was mobile phones to actually keep track of them, even though they weren't in the same locations. We were still able to contact them and find out what was going on with them with regards to the different kinds of shocks they were experiencing, the kinds of capacities they were using to try and manage those, and what the effect was on their well-being outcomes. So we were able to track those populations over time using phones, so we did have some attrition, but it wasn't as bad as we thought it was going to be. So I think there are ways to try to capture that effectively. Over.
Yeah. And I think it's a good question. It comes up a lot, especially in pastoral livelihood areas. And so, and I know I'm working on an RMS right now in Kenya, where the timing of the data collection, we took into consideration like when typical pastoral movements were happening. And so, it just really depends on who you're surveying. And then trying to think about these things ahead of time. I know the toolkit doesn't get into this level of detail on migratory populations. It probably should, because I think this question comes up quite a bit. But it's all about your data collection strategy, and that is one element that you want to consider is your population migratory? Is there predictable times of the year when people are moving around? Are there particular holidays, celebrations that will affect your results? This is particularly important for food security. There's a lot of, beyond seasonal. I think seasonal is weather, but it's also could be migratory seasons. It could be times of the year where people have more resources, less resources. So these are all things that you'll want to consider in your data collection strategy. But really the bottom line is it's not impossible to follow mobile populations, migratory populations, even IDP or internally displaced populations with people that are internally displaced. There's, a lot of people do have phones these days, and so there's ways to collect that information over time. All right, Maya.
Well,
Was there
that
any?
really relates really well to the last question, which is around the frequency. So is there a most recommended frequency for RMS data collection?
Yeah. I think, yeah, sorry, I know that all our answers are, it depends on your objectives. So the next scenario that we'll be going through, this scenario, we collected data annually, which I think is the least frequent you can collect. I think annual is not as helpful as more frequent, but again, it depends on your budget. It depends on your objectives. There's some RMSs that are monthly. That's probably the most frequent you could do. That we had a speaker who was not able to join us today, who was going to talk through the Catholic Relief Services, their version of RMS. They do it monthly, and they have a very short questionnaire. And so depends on kind of your objectives and goals. But I think the options are monthly, quarterly, or every 3 months, twice a year, annual. But it really depends. So sorry, that's not an exact answer.
I think it's budget drives a lot of that decision.
Yeah.
But also, the CRS approach, they embed enumerators within villages. And so, it's actually somebody from the village that might be tracking. So that keeps the cost down a little bit in terms of sending out survey teams to go out and collect the data. So there are different ways to deal with this. But I think in the end, it ends up being resources that drive how often you collect the data.
Yep, those practical considerations. All right, we're going to move to our next and final scenario for you all. And this one's actually, this one's a little bit harder maybe than the first one. But so this second scenario is focused on the hard to define RMS population. And so in this scenario, Program B works primarily with market and government actors to increase the availability and quality of food available in the implementation areas. And so the program agreed they want to design the RMS to evaluate the impact of the program. So the primary objective that they agreed on for this scenario is that they want to evaluate the impact of the program. However, the program's just started and they do not have a list of participants or a final list of communities even. And so they weren't really clear on how to proceed with designing the RMS. So in this scenario where you're working primarily through market and government actors to increase the availability and quality of food, in this scenario where they want to do an impact evaluation, but they don't know who their participants are, because they're working primarily through other actors. How would you solve this? How would you use the toolkit? Where in the toolkit would you find some solutions or answers? So if we can get that poll back up and give everyone a couple minutes to click through the toolkit to try to find, some answers. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm not sure if this is how I'm supposed to share the results, but it looks like we have a lot of different answers here. And it looks like primarily we're thinking the solutions are in the sampling strategy, so decision 6. Also in the data collection strategy as well. That's where primarily we're finding the solutions. For this scenario, I'm going to actually be talking you through it and my experience with trying to figure out this challenge through a program in Ethiopia called Resilience in Pastoralist Areas. And so for this program, the goal of the program was to increase food security and economic development of individuals and households in the implementation area. So really where they were wanting to see the results was in those individual and household with food security and economic development. However, the majority of the interventions were implemented through private and public partners, so such as market actors. They were using a market systems development approach in this program. And so when we were defining the RMS sampling strategy, and we decided really from the very beginning of the program that we wanted to do an RMS. We knew we wanted to demonstrate our results at that individual level, but we had no idea who the participants are. They didn't have a registration process. Really, it was just working through market actors and that kind of knock-on effect to the communities. That's where we were trying to find the results. And so for this particular scenario, I wanted to share within the toolkit, there is a link that is really helpful if you have this kind of tricky population or you're not sure how you're supposed to construct your sampling frame. So there's a link here on the Decision 6 chapter that will take you to a sampling decision tree. So we're gonna open that now. It's in Miro, so hopefully everyone here has at least used Miro once, but it's fairly easy to navigate. You'll see this decision tree. And if you scroll in, essentially, it's asking you that primary question of who's the population you want to generalize your findings to. And then it walks you through a series of questions that helps to lead you to whether you want to do a population-based or participant-based sampling. So for this particular example, we first had to ask ourselves, are the majority of the interventions directly or indirectly implemented with individuals and households? So for this example, it was primarily indirect. And so you'll see in the tree branch, we followed the indirect. Up here is direct, but that wasn't for us, so we followed the indirect pathway. And then there's a question of, do you have a way of knowing who the individuals and households are that will be targeted by those indirect interventions? So do you know who they are? Is there a registration process where you can have a list of households? So for our scenario, the answer was no, we didn't know who our population was. And so it then leads you to this: consider drawing the sample from the general population of the implementation area. And so really that's what we did. We identified market catchment areas. So we knew where the markets were that they were strengthening through the program. And we sort of drew, some circles around those markets. And that was our sampling area. So the population that was living, within 10, I think, kilometers of the market, we sampled from that. And so we started with the market as kind of our clusters, were those market areas. And then the households living within that market catchment area, that's really where we drew our sample. But it was, meant to be population-based. So we wanted it to be representative of the kabeles, or those communities in the areas where they were doing that market strengthening work. And so that's how we landed on our sampling strategy. And you'll see on the screen a link to some learning briefs that are available on the FSN network from the RIPA program that will show you some interesting results from the RMS, and you can see what the impact was and how they were able to show that at the individual and household level, being able to demonstrate some impacts there despite the program being implemented through more of a facilitative approach. Okay, so I think that because our third scenario, we didn't have time to do that, I wanted to just pause and see if there was other questions that we had from the audience, and then we'll move to the kind of final evaluation and final words. So Maya, I'll kick it back to you.
Thank you. So no questions at this moment. Not sure if there are any additional questions. If so, feel free to also just raise your hand, or if you have any additional reflection or comment on all this, feel free to, raise your hand and unmute and speak, or just put it in the chat or in the Q&A.
Yeah, I wanted to, while you're thinking about any additional questions you have, I wanted to share a resource that our colleague from CRS, who is going to share their MIRA, which stands for Monthly Interval Resilience Analysis. So this is the CRS monthly recurrent monitoring survey that happens. There's a dashboard, and maybe we can copy this link because it's a little bit hard to look at and to remember. So we can maybe copy this link into the chat. But they have a publicly available Power BI dashboard that is very well put together and very interesting. So you can sort of see an example of a very high frequency, but sort of light touch RMS approach that the CRS that the CRS puts together in different countries. They have an example in Ethiopia, I think in Burkina Faso, and a couple other countries where they conduct this. So if you're interested in seeing what that looks like, you can click through this Power BI dashboard.
All right, so with that, then I think that we can end a little bit early today. I'm sure that there are no protests against that. So to wrap up, we do have a quick event evaluation that we would love for you to fill out, just to know how you experienced today's webinar, to give us a chance to improve for the next one. The link is in the chat. It's just a very quick questionnaire. So thank you for filling out that. We will, of course, send out the recording and the slides from today's webinar. And as you can see on the screen, Jill has shared her email address. Do feel free to reach out with any questions that pop up, any comments, anything you think about after this session today. And I also just wanted to mention that if you are thinking or planning to do an RMS yourself and feel that even with this toolkit, you need some additional support, some technical assistance, we can offer that from the Center for Resilience and from REAL. Please just reach out to Jill and we can discuss your needs and how we can best support you in that. I think that's all I had to say. Thank you again. Do fill out the evaluation. Do sign up for the FSN Network newsletter to keep up to date with new reports, new RMS findings that as they come out from different studies around the world. Thank you so much, Jill. Thank you so much, everybody who came and spent this time with us. And have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Do feel free to reach out at any time. Thanks so much.